why was it so difficult to accept that your child was going to have a disability and not be typical? That you're doing a little bit of internal examination of your own biases and your own expectations and your own values, and that was like a kind of a meta layer to all of it. That this is hard and disappointing and life-changing, but also why is it hard and disappointing and life-changing? Why couldn't we just roll with the punches and accept, who she was going to be?
There are a wide variety of questions and a whirlwind of feelings that parents try to manage through the stages of finding a diagnosis for their child. My name is Seth Carnell, and this is the Go Shout Love podcast. Welcome, shouters, to September 2021 as we feature a new family and a new kiddo. This month we are introducing you to Cecily, or Cece as her family affectionately calls her. Cece is a joyful and social 4-year-old who has been diagnosed with Pitt Hopkins syndrome. Today, we are talking with Louie and Lizzy, who are Cece's parents. There's a lot covered in this first episode, including getting to know the family through two great personalities in Louie and Lizzy. They talk about the journey of discovering the diagnosis and the various kinds of interactions with medical professionals. Some diagnoses are discovered before birth. Pitt Hopkins is not one of those. Neither way of discovering are easy, but this is what Lizzy and Louie will walk us through. Plus, this conversation at the end of it has a Patty. That probably doesn't make sense now, but Lizzy and Louie will tell you who Patty is and why every medical journey family needs one. I may say this a lot, but this isn't a conversation you want to skip, and probably one that would be good to share with a friend or a loved one, especially someone who might be going through a similar journey. As I mentioned, this is part one, and it's part one of 2 episodes about Cecily. Both are definitely worth your time to listen and engage with. One very tangible way to engage with this family is by supporting their month through the purchase of a t-shirt or other items available on our website. Visit goshout.love. I'll revisit that at the end of this podcast and give you more details. Leading this conversation is Josh Veach, one of our co-directors of Go Shout Love. This was recorded over Zoom, and in fact, Lizzy joined us from home and Louie joined us from his work as a police sergeant. By nature of it being Zoom, there is some overlapping and some audio glitches. Beyond that, we are very proud to feature this family and little adorable Cece.
Liz and Lou, welcome to the Go Shout Love podcast. It's so good to have you with us.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So all this month of September, we are getting to shout love for your little girl, and we're excited about that, to tell her story and your family story. So let's start there. Introduce us to your daughter.
We are a family of 5. We have 3 children. Daphne is 7. Cecily is 4, and Louis is 18 months. So Cece is a middle child, and she's very happy. She's very sweet. She's very affectionate. She's kind of everyone's favorite person. If you get to meet her, you don't forget her.
Tell us a little bit about her personality. What is she? How would you describe her personality?
Sweet, bright, loving, affectionate. She, when she smiles or when she laughs, which is quite often, she'll capture the attention of anybody around her.
And so you mentioned that she's a middle child. So she's got 18 months on the low end, and then Daphne's 7. So she's kind of sandwiched right there in the middle. What is her relationship like with her siblings?
She's often physically sandwiched right there in the middle. a lot of rough play. It's funny. I don't think I would have. My instincts are sometimes to tell the kids to take it easy with her, but she clearly loves the the rough play, the rough and tumble. Daphne and is often like making silly animal sounds or snuggling with her or trying to pick her up. And Louis is crawling all over her, trying to put bows in her hair or take bows out of her hair. But yeah, they are very lovely together.
We'll get into a little bit more of the medical element of Cecily's journey, but as a mom, did it take a minute? How long did it take to adjust to like being okay with that rough house? Like, was there times where, based on where she's been, her journey's been, where you were extra cautious or extra nervous about some of that, or did it come naturally just to let it go?
That I'm still adjusting to that. There's another one. My husband is also known for rough play. There's a lot of like elaborate tumbling games, often right before bedtime, throwing up in the air. Yeah. And I'm like, why don't we just play some gentle lullabies and read some books? But I'm the only one in the family who thinks that's inappropriate bedtime.
Right. Well, bedtime.
That's good. Cece prefers the rough and tumble stuff.
Yeah. Well, and get that heartbeat moving. Really get that energy up before bedtime. I struggle with that too. Lots of laughing and giggling with our kids. And then it's like, oh yeah, I made my job a little bit more difficult on the wind down and get to sleep after the high energy stuff. But it's way more fun that way. I got to agree with Dad here. That's fun. So she's loves her siblings, has a great time there. She is, I think you mentioned this, she's 4, right? Mm-hmm. And what has her journey been like with school or preschool or other like social elements? Has she gotten to connect with friends?
Yeah, I mean, Cece is very social. One of the reasons, I think she likes so much being a sibling is that there's a lot of face-to-face contact and physical contact and close attention, and that is very much, her style of interaction. Loves crowds, loves busy places, loves when there's a lot of people in the house. So she really likes to be around people and, at the center of the energy. She does go to school. She goes to a CPSE preschool. So it's all for children with different abilities. And her classroom is, I think it's 8 or so kids. They all have different, diagnoses and needs, but they all have movement goals. They all use a lot of special equipment to practice learning how to take steps or to sit with, proper posture. So her classroom is specialized, and she gets a lot of therapy there, right there at school. So from, what we can tell, we're not there. And of course, last year's closure was brutal, but right. What we can tell, I think she's happy at school.
That's awesome. Well, we've touched on the kids. We've introduced Cecily. Let's talk about you guys. Introduce us to Mom and Dad and what you do, what you enjoy doing as hobbies and all that good stuff.
Go ahead.
Should I introduce you or?
No, you can. You go.
I'll introduce myself. It's harder, I think, to do that.
You want me to tell them about you?
Yeah, I'll tell you. I'll tell them everything you get wrong.
This could get fun. This could get really fun. I like this.
This is like one of those dating.
Well, we're both sort of from the area. We live in Saratoga Springs, New York, currently. Lizzy grew up in Guilderland, right near Albany, New York, and I grew up in Colony, New York, which is just outside of Albany as well. Lizzy then went to college in Rochester. I went to college in Colgate. We met after college, and Lizzy's brother actually introduced us. I like to tell the story that I met her at a Christmas party in like 2005, but she didn't meet me until like 2008 when she actually recognized me as a person who was trying to catch her attention. But we got married in 2012. And we moved to Saratoga sometime around then. Lizzy is currently a teacher at Albany Academy, teaches English. She's the English chair there on the boys' side of the private academy. And I am a Colony police sergeant in the town of Colony.
Whoa. That's my job.
Sorry, but it's all about you. I forgot.
It's all about you.
Yeah. Sorry, this is all about you. Yeah. Lizzy's she's done a couple of different things as far as work goes. She used to work at Siena College as an adjunct professor. She worked for a company called Backroads out in Utah, which was essentially a glamping type company where she would set up camping tours, biking tours, hiking tours, things like that. Eventually, she came back to the region, and that's when we got married back in 2012. There's a bunch of stuff I'm leaving out, but that's the general gist of it.
Awesome.
What else do we need to know about Lizzy? She's a writer. She's an excellent cook. I think she makes top-notch salads. She ran in college. She was a sprinter, but has also done 5Ks and marathons. And she's a ace of a mom. She is Cecily's number one advocate. Without Lizzy, none of the paperwork would get done because I'm a disaster with that. And she spends countless hours, I would say a full-time job's worth of time doing all the advocating, all the paperwork, and all the extra that needs to be done for Cece to get exactly what she needs.
Yep. I think that's a pretty good summary.
There's probably more, but what am I missing?
I'll sneak something in later, maybe.
All right. Well, that's a great introduction. Okay,
Yeah.
Liz, your turn.
Sure. This is my husband. I'm sure that you guys are very, very good partners to somebody, but he is the best partner around. I really married the perfect man. I have a hard time sometimes connecting with people who complain about their spouses because he just does so much. He's a true equal. Cecily and the girls, and Lou, they're all really, really lucky to have him. As you can see, Lou is a police sergeant and loves his job, wanted to be a police officer since he was a little boy. He used to write speeding tickets to people on the street. And here he is, fulfilling his destiny. Louie is very good at every sport except for yoga. Let it be known that I am much better at yoga than Lou. It's not technically a competition, but absolutely that is the one place where I can outcompete him. But he's a particularly good runner. He's the gold medalist for the World Police and Fire Games. So he competes internationally.
Wow.
In the yep. So it's like you run and target shoot. And he runs the local a local team here. And every weekend we're like, one of our favorite things to do as a family is actually go to like a 5K or something on a Saturday morning. Sometimes there's a kids run. Sometimes, we'll both run. Sometimes just Lou. Yeah.
Well, it sounds like you guys have a really solid foundation of a relationship that is perfect for a journey like this and supporting your family. So very cool. Thank you for introducing each other to us. So let's get into a little bit of Cecily's story and kind of what the last 4 years have looked like for her and then for your family as well. So you've told us ahead of time that ahead of her birth, everything was as normal as possible. Your pregnancy with her was normal and really no concerns immediately. But tell us a little bit about maybe something what started to grab attention and maybe trigger that there might be some medical complexities going on with her when she was younger.
I mean, there was a pretty brief time where we thought nothing was wrong. She the pregnancy was healthy, the birth was healthy. It's funny to look back on that period of time because it was really only a few months, where we were just having like a typical experience with a new baby. I think she was 4, maybe 5 months when her pediatrician flagged a number of small concerns. And the way he said it was like any one of these individually wouldn't, concern me, but the fact that we've got a number of small concerns, he wanted to seek some specialists. And that day is really vivid in my mind. I was really troubled by that, because he mentioned scary words like geneticist and neurologist. Cecily's eyes were crossed, which a lot of babies' eyes are crossed, and it usually resolves. So that hadn't alarmed me. She wasn't gaining weight. She hadn't yet, she wasn't reaching or like doing kind of those very early milestones. But I was also like, this isn't my first rodeo. We've already had a baby. Kids develop differently. It doesn't matter. It was really easy to dismiss any one of those individual concerns. But it was, and it's funny because some parents, their journey trying to get a diagnosis is a decade, 2 decades, for some people. But in looking back on it, it was really only, a year and a half. But boy, that year and a half was hard and involved. Our kind of theory was that it was just a vision problem because we knew that the eyes were crossed and we knew it could be fixed. We had great doctors at Boston Children's Hospital. She started therapy with early intervention very early, but like our running belief from the beginning was that once her vision was fixed, then everything would fall into place. That she wasn't speaking because she couldn't see our mouths, and she wasn't reaching because she couldn't see toys. It all was like it was a really nice, tidy theory. It's just that it was, an inaccurate theory. And the older she got, the more pronounced the missed milestones were. Oh my gosh, Lou, we had the MRI, we had blood tests, urine tests, metabolism tests, she was tested for SMA, she was tested for Fragile X syndrome, like anything anybody wanted to give us, we would look into it. And I got kind of lost in the black hole of the internet. I'd stay up at night searching every condition I could think of. But I realized I would really, really get focused on conditions that had a solution. And I would convince myself that it was this thing for which there was a medication, or for which there was a treatment, or for which you grew out of it, and it wasn't until she was a little over a year, we took her to a specialist who did not have a specific diagnosis or cause of a diagnosis, but said that she would live with intellectual disability for her whole life. And I think there's probably a lot of people in our life that maybe knew that was coming. Cecily at that point had already seen a lot of specialists. She'd already been getting physical therapy and speech therapy. And I think maybe they all knew that was coming, but it just took the ground beneath us. We just did not think that was it. We're both so optimistic. I think we just couldn't envision that this was going to be it.
And at that point, you hadn't the vision wasn't just a theory that like she had surgeries done, right? At this point,
yeah,
or
surgeries, and she was getting eye patching and she was wearing eyeglasses. So the vision still hadn't like perfectly resolved. So that was still in part what I was holding on to.
Right.
And that was, that was a really, really hard day. And it was a really hard period. It was hard to make sense of it. It was also really hard to admit that it was hard. Why was it so difficult to accept that your child was going to have a disability and not be typical? That, you're doing a little bit of internal examination of your own biases and your own expectations and your own values. And that was like a kind of a meta layer to all of it. That this is hard and disappointing and life-changing. But also, why is it hard and disappointing and life-changing? Why couldn't we just roll with the punches and accept, who she was going to be? There's a period of time between being told that she had intellectual disability and being told what the cause was. That's like the second moment, but I don't want to jump ahead without giving you a chance to speak, Lou.
No, I remember you calling me and you were an absolute wreck. And coming home I was at a training day that day. It was one of the toughest days of my life. And I think that you're right, that I think probably a lot of other people knew about it, or at least suspected that something like that was coming. And I don't know, as a parent, I guess you just try and project the most positive outlook for your children. So it was tougher for us to see that. And then when it hit us hard. And I don't know. echo your statements a little bit that it was tough to deal with. And then it was also tough to figure out why we couldn't handle it better. But it's a life-changing moment. And I think looking back on it, I give ourselves a little bit more, I cut us some more slack on that, because it was just tough moment, tough day.
That's a really interesting angle that I don't know that we've ever really talked about with anyone else. But the idea that you're going through this moment that is extremely impactful for your child, obviously, and extremely impactful for the day-to-day lives of your family. But then the internal element of having to process and recognize individual work, like personal internal work that has to be worked through, like you were saying, of why is this hard? Why do I struggle with accepting or going through the next steps? That's a deeper challenge that probably isn't talked about as much, that families have to go through in a situation like that. So Liz, you mentioned that there's this like gap between this clear mark in Cecily's journey that we get some level of developmental delay, and that this is likely a long-term issue. But yet not knowing the underlying cause. What was that length of that period? What was the length of it, and how did you manage that gap?
Yeah, so it was about 5 months before we had the answer. So the physician, I will say that the physician that gave us the diagnosis of global development delay, which is, intellectual disability, was he was cut from a different cloth than I am. He was a little bleak. He delivered it like he was just telling me that her hair color was brown instead of blonde. It was an extraordinarily tough experience. And I had a series of questions I'd asked. I mean, I was just so blown away in the moment. But I did ask some questions. I said, will she go to school? And he said, yes. And I said, will she go to college? And he said, no. I said, will she have children? And he said, no. Like he had a black and white answer for everything. So it was like he had written her future for me. And you just feel like all your dreams, all your expectations are just clattering to the ground, like blocks being knocked over. I couldn't make sense of what he was saying. And the only kind of gray area answer he gave me was, I don't know what the cause is. And he said, a lot of times we don't know. So I was prepared that might be the case. So we ended up working with I knew that this doctor wasn't for us. I've also since learned that, her cognitive abilities, they are profoundly impacted. She's not probably, going to be on the higher level of people with intellectual disability, but I also realized a lot of those people do get married and they do go to college and they have these great programs and they have jobs, and that, that wasn't, so I knew that like this guy wasn't the guy for us, that we needed somebody who was going to be a little more hopeful and flexible. So we didn't go back to him. We ended up going to a geneticist at Boston Children's Hospital who we'd actually previously connected with, who'd helped us with other tests. And I remember she explained that we only know something about like half of the genes in the body. That it's like still a really a really new field. And she said, if the condition she has is a known condition, I promise you I'm going to find it for her. And that gave me confidence. And I thought, all right, and I also was prepared that we might not know what it is, and that's okay too. And our geneticist was fantastic. She worked so relentlessly with insurance. They had an extraordinarily expensive test that she appealed and appealed and appealed until they did the test, and they paid for it, and it came back, and she was diagnosed. This was now 4 or 5 months later with a very, very rare condition. And so, she found it. She followed through on that promise. If it exists, we're going to find it for you. And it's funny because Cece has some siblings out there who have this condition, who don't have the same, families, insurance plans, great physicians, and it's frustrating to know that is the case, for other families, but we were in the lucky faction. And she called me and she said, it's a very rare condition. It's called Pitt Hopkins syndrome. And strangely, that day wasn't, the ground beneath me had already shaken. Things were already hard. Like that was not the hard day. There was almost something uplifting about it because we knew who our people would be. We knew which specialists to seek. We knew, what to expect. And then you read about this diagnosis, and there's some really hard things to read, and there's some, less hard things to read. It wasn't discovered until recently, so we don't know a lot about older people with it, but it doesn't seem to have, like certain, really young mortality rates, for instance, which is something we'd always been attuned to as being an option. But there was a lot of hard news too, that she, it was like when we went to see the specialist too at the Pitt Hopkins clinic, which was luckily in Boston, not too far from us. He told us that she would not speak. And that was a really, really, really hard thing to get accustomed to. It's still hard sometimes. And they told us that she would probably walk, but maybe years. She's 4 and she's not there yet, but we still think it's going to happen someday. And so, having a diagnosis helped tremendously. There's a very, very active support group of Pitt Hopkins parents, people that I've never met in person, but I feel really close with. It's so rare. There's no one in our area. I don't know of a single person, within hours of us. But, we knew which specialists to go to. We knew which parents to find. We knew in some ways how to reshape our expectations. And Cecily's cognitive disability is profound. I don't think she's going to ever live independently. I don't think she's going to have a job. And knowing those things is also hard, but also helpful. When we left that doctor's office, you take your visions down of what you hope is going to happen, and you're bringing it down. And in some ways, I admit I've had to bring it down again for, what is a realistic capability. And you try to balance your optimism and your belief, with your rationale. Mm-hmm. And they're not always, those two parts of the brain and the heart don't always want to collaborate well, but you have to find that place. So that you know what to do, what therapies to seek, and what future to plan for.
Yeah. And now you're, 4 years into this journey, and about 3 years, I guess, after the diagnosis, around that part.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I'm curious, you kind of, and this kind of builds off the theme of like that internal work of like processing. Why is this hard to process? You mentioned that one of the questions that you asked that initial doctor, with the questionable bedside manner, what will she go to college? Like this line of questioning that's very like it's activity based or capabilities based. And I'm curious how you've grown, or what time has done or processing this has done that maybe has changed your view on like those questions. Like is there a different set of questions? Like if someone's going through a similar situation now, that you would say, and yes, here's things that she may not be able to do, but she will still be able to do this, this, and this, that kind of realigns, like value of life might be too strong of a statement, but to be able to say that.
That's exactly it. Yeah. Cause like the markers, those many years ago, the markers of what makes a good life were those questions that I asked. School and relationships and marriage and professions and independence, and those, in part because those were the markers of what made my life good, Right. But yeah, what are the questions to ask? Will she be loved?
Yeah.
Will she find joy? Will she love? Will she live a happy, good life? Yeah. I mean, those are the value questions.
Yeah. And bring joy to others. Yeah. Lou, what was that season like for you? That in between season?
Well, so, and after the initial diagnosis, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't in a darker place than I like to be. it was very, very tough for a while. But like Lizzy said, the second diagnosis from our geneticist at Boston Children's Hospital, and I just got to say, Boston Children's Hospital is just, I mean, not everybody has the means to get there or the insurance, but they were just phenomenal with us. We couldn't be happier with our ability to be able to go there. Every single person there was just phenomenal. But when we got the diagnosis from them, then it was Pitt Hopkins. I remember it vividly. We were on a joint phone call, Lizzy and I and the doctor, and it felt like a relief to just know, because there was a great chance that we weren't going to know. And the knowing what it was and things that we could expect was a giant weight off of our shoulders, at least mine. In the same sentence, she said that it's Pitt Hopkins syndrome. It's a rare condition. She also said that there's no known treatment. So that was a little bit of a high that we knew what it was. And then also immediately a little bit of a low that there was no known treatment for it at the time. And there still isn't. But overall, receiving that diagnosis was a great positive, I thought. And it still is. And like Lizzy said, it's a giant community of people. I mean, not giant, but it's a strong community of people. Because they all seem to be involved in some way, shape, or form. But I don't know. It was an interesting year. It's a year that we'll never forget for both good and bad reasons.
Sure.
I don't know.
And it was all consuming, right? Like I had to take a year off of work because there was no daycare that would take her at some point, which is another topic for advocacy. Mm-hmm. I don't think, Lou, you'd mentioned you hadn't been able to focus on certain side projects with work, right? It was hard. I mean, it was all consuming. It took all of us to get through this. And what you said too, Lou, about the relief reminded me of something else too. That another really hard thing that we went through, I think, was self-blame. We both, because we didn't know the cause, we both thought we had caused it. Like I was convinced I had eaten something during my pregnancy. One of us had inhaled some chemical. We hadn't been gentle enough laying her down in the crib. Like we just because you're doing every test and every test was coming back like, nope, it's not this, it's not this, it's not this. That I tormented myself thinking it was something I had done. That we had somehow been the cause of it. And that was, being able to finally exonerate yourself was also a relief. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think as parents, maybe this is more personality based on each individual, but if you're someone who is like, you like control, a season where there's this huge unknown is really hard to process, because you want to be able to clearly know this is why everything is happening, or this is this is the correct order. This is the control element. And when you're living outside of your control and outside of any known, I think that's hard in any area of life for people that might be true for. But when families go through seasons like this, there's often an individual or individuals that stand out as part of the journey and like help stand in the gap. Sometimes that's family, sometimes that's friends. But as you go through these significant steps in the journey, that there's a name or face that stands out, that was just there at the right time and made a huge impact for you guys. Is there anyone like that comes to mind when we talk about that?
I have someone in mind, but I want to see what you say first, Louie.
Is it Patty?
Yep. Cece had several therapists, but when Cece first started therapy, it's called early intervention. The therapists come to your home, and I was so resentful of them. I did not think she needed therapy. I thought this was all a bunch of garbage, and she just needed glasses and everything would be fine. And the turnaround that I had with these therapists from kind of sulking in their presence in my home to the end of it where, we send them Christmas cards and we hug them and they're in our house all the time. But one in particular, Patty, was Cece's special education therapist, and she just loved Cecily immediately. I'm sure this was beyond the rules of her job description, but she was like always kissing Cecily and just loving her and stopping by and dropping off toys for her and stuff. And, Patty just was our rock through this. She came with me actually to that doctor appointment. So Lou couldn't come because he had to work, the initial one. And I have to admit that Patty is one of those people who knew, I think, we were about to get hard news. Makes sense, right? This is her profession. She spends a lot of time with kids like Cece. I think she knew that I was absolutely unprepared. I think she knew Louie couldn't come, and she said, "Oh, do you want me to come with you?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." We're just chatting and making our way through it. I just didn't anticipate what was going to happen, but she did. And she came and she went to the doctor appointment with us, and she held my hand and she held Cecily, and she, stayed with us and she left with us. And, she's not Cece's therapist now because Cece has since graduated from that phase of it, but we're still in touch with her all the time.
She's still Cece's Patty. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so cool to hear that because, even in this conversation, we've kind of heard both ends of the medical spectrum, right? The doctor who gives these very clear doom and gloom responses, and then the other end of that is the geneticist that advocated and fought insurance on your behalf, and then people like Patty who go above and beyond and not just like provide the therapy element, but the almost like the care for the parent, like creating that buffer and transition for you, recognizing that was going to be a significant moment. What a cool thing for someone. That's clearly a calling for Patty and people like her to be able to do that. That's incredible.
If you are not familiar with us at Go Shout Love, we do amazing things for amazing families with kids on rare medical journeys. Each month we shout love for a feature family with creative apparel inspired by the kiddos. This month's Everyone Belongs t-shirt design is inspired by Cecily, a joyful and social 4-year-old girl from Saratoga Springs, New York. Every purchase in September will go towards finding Cecily a service or therapy dog. You can also start a subscription and shout love with us every month with each feature family. It's a very tangible way to make a difference in our world, not only by supporting them, but your t-shirt will help tell their story. Please take a moment to write a review of this podcast on whatever platform you are listening on, and then share on social media. This is Cece's story, and a story that deserves to be told. Plus, her smiling face will brighten anyone's day, so share our posts and pictures throughout the month as well. As I mentioned earlier, this is just part 1 of the conversation. Part 2 will be released very soon, so please stay tuned. And in the meantime, go shout love.